Pleased to be joined now by draft analyst for NFL.com, Eric Edholm, joining us here. Already has his top 100 NFL draft prospects listing out at NFL.com, and also did a little power ranking in the offseason. Look at this. I mean, he's still cranking it out. You know, even when people aren't playing games, he's using free agency as his lever to pull here. So, Eric, good to have you with us as always. Appreciate the time. You had the Bills in the 5-hole there on your rankings list after the first initial and major wave of free agency. They did do a lot of work to re-sign their young core to extensions. Where do you kind of come down on them, you know, after the dust has kind of settled on that first wave of free agency?
Yeah, I think you saw a trend around the league that certainly fit in with the Bills of re-signing core players. You know, the dirty little secret is that it wasn't the greatest free agent class of all time. And, you know, there weren't going to be as many sort of showcase players swapping teams. And, you know, I think you saw that approach around the league. But I did like the Bills sort of being selectively aggressive at certain positions. Obviously, defensive line seemed to get some new bodies, even if there are some questions about the availability of those guys. But, you know, come playoff time, I think they're going to want all the depth they can get. Especially considering how, you know, certain games play out towards the end of the year. So, yeah, I mean, given the landscape right now with free agency kind of, you know, dwindling to a trickle at this point, with a lot of the hay in the veteran barn, if you will, you know, it's hard not to like the I would say the sense behind locking up your key guys and also, you know, making certain moves that fit both the market and your needs.
Yeah, we're having a conversation today about Christian Benford, the corner who was a 6th-round draft pick and has been a solid and sometimes spectacular corner, and outperformed his contract. And James Cook, who at running back was maybe behind Josh Allen, was the biggest engine on an offense that scored more points than anybody in the league when it was all said and done last year. So you got two of these guys, both key on their sides of the ball. How much weight do you give to each one, and maybe as a priority to getting re-signed?
Yeah, obviously, anytime you have key players who are due for free agency the following year, you see a lot of teams obviously follow that pattern of let's draft for next year's needs, or at least protect ourselves in case those players, you know, outprice themselves. If we can't afford them, you know, we're forced to either trade or move on from them. Then you have somebody in the tank and you have somebody with a year under your belt. That makes a lot of sense from a team building standpoint. You've seen a lot of, you know, teams like the Chiefs and Eagles do that successfully, Bills included as well. And so, yeah, I mean, I would say, you know, you have to decide what's the number you're comfortable with for both guys. Obviously, you know, the running back market for years has been depressed in terms of the financial element of it. I think we're seeing a little bit of a cycling back of the run game in the NFL, which pleases me. I'm an old school guy, but it's nice also to see some of those backs get paid. But, you know, if his reported price is around $15 million, that puts him not at the top, but very close to the top. I think off the top of my head, only Saquon Barkley and Christian McCaffrey would average more than that. Would come in, you know, that would be a deal very similar to what Jonathan Taylor received. So, you know, obviously you have to figure out value and how much they matter to your system. But, you know, as the Bills are still in that Super Bowl window, if you will, you know, whatever that means, I still think you have to, you know, consider keeping players like that, even if you have a Ray Davis or a Ty Johnson or somebody like that.
Yeah, it's a really curious case here, Eric, for both of these players because, yes, corner, we know how important that position is.
Yeah.
That market has also been reset with the Stingley deal, which makes it more expensive for anybody trying to sign a quality corner that they want to keep in the fold to an extension. And then you have the running back, to your point. Yes, Barkley kind of reset the market with his 2-year extension at $20 million average annual value. I don't think Cook has the workload of a Barkley to maybe merit something close to that. And the franchise tag right now is still 13.5 at running back. So you'd like to think there's some common ground there. And I argue that, you know, with an offense that's devoid of an alpha receiver, Cook is your best mismatch player on offense after Allen. It almost behooves you to keep him. But then in the same breath, we know that in the draft, it's a great class of running backs, and not for that matter, it's a great class. It's a pretty good class of corners too. So it makes you wonder what the Bills are thinking here, and they extended 4 other guys, but not these 2, and coincidentally, the draft's strong at both of those positions.
Yeah, I would argue it's a little stronger, a little deeper, a little more, flourished with high-end talent at the running back position, but I think your point stands too. I would also argue that of the 2 positions, if you're just looking at the roster right now, cornerback's probably the bigger concern. It's also sort of the higher priority position league-wide, right? You have to think about what other teams rather will pay for your players. So, if a Christian Benford were to hit the market, do I think he would hit that $20 million per year elite corner? I think there are about 7 or 8 guys who kind of fit that level. Probably not, but maybe not too far below that, given, like you said, how the market kind of resets, and especially at these big positions like that. So, as far as immediate needs, I would say, locking up Christian Benford first might make a little sense, because as you said, that the tag number for running back still remains low. And you can always kind of buttress that with one of these fine backs in this class. And just like you did with Davis last year. And I think feel pretty good about yourself, even if you had to let a great player go. So I see both sides of it as well.
I know you've done some work on this draft coming up. What's the top of this draft going to look like when you've got a guy like a Travis Hunter who is, well, you don't even know, it's a question mark as to how you're going to use the guy, let alone that he may be the best player. Sure. Where do you play him? I mean, it throws a little extra degree of difficulty on the top of this draft, right?
It does. Absolutely. I mean, Hunter, you could argue, is one of the more intriguing draft prospects at any position, much less 2 positions, right, in the last several seasons. And just talking to people this offseason, it was clear that, everybody had a little different view of it, right? Everybody felt like they had their own kind of plan or what they would recommend. Again, not knowing necessarily what the coaches' plans were. A lot of conversations I had at the Combine, for instance, just with people who had watched him to that point. Maybe it was a director level person. Maybe it was an area scout who was out west and saw some Colorado games. And they said, you can make a case for him at either position. You could make a case for being able to do both on at least a part-time level, but doing both at the same rate that he did at Colorado is, I think is asking a lot, right? We haven't seen an NFL player do this in many moons. So I think expecting somebody to come along at 180 pounds or whatever and be able to pick that up in the NFL is a little bit short-sighted, I would say. So you have to have a plan for him, I think, obviously, and decide, what position are we starting him out at? Do we give him reps in the other spot? How do we divvy up the meeting room time? So he's this fascinating prospect, but in a way, he's a lot like the draft class as a whole. There are still questions. I think the top of this draft right now, not only is it lacking in those blue chip players on the level of a Hunter or an Abdul Carter or whoever you want to throw in that mix, but there's also just the uncertainty of how it's going to play out. We don't know the Titans' plans right now. We don't know the Browns, what they're going to do at quarterback, the Giants. And so there's this big trickle-down effect. And, people seem to think, at least in the conversations I've had the last few weeks, that really anything is possible at the top of this draft. And you could see a little chaos and some surprises up there.
Yeah, the Bills are going to be waiting a whole lot longer, sitting down there at 30 for a lot of stuff to happen in front of them. And we know Brandon Beane could move up, could move down. He's got 10 picks at his disposal, so he has maneuverability. I know you had an initial mock before the Combine, and you had the Bills taking a defensive tackle out of Michigan and Kenneth Grant. And I know you've got another one coming up here soon, another mock draft that you're going to release in the next week or so here. Do you anticipate your leanings changing as it pertains to the Bills? Because I think one thing's for certain. It's going to be somebody on the defensive side of the ball. The question is it going to be on the front end or the back end when the Bills pick at 30?
Yeah, that's the question I think I have for him. I could see edge. I could see an interior defender, 0-1 technique type of defensive tackle like Kenneth Grant. I could see a cornerback for sure. That's a position now that feels lean, even with Dane Jackson back, and you know what you have in him, and probably feel pretty comfortable starting him week 1 if you need to. But obviously, long-term depth, things like that, flexibility, you'd love to add at least one more body there, I would imagine. So those are probably the positions that we're considering in that area. Yeah, the Bills, right? I think
Right.
it's going to be interesting. Like you said, I think the cornerback class is good, and it's good enough to where most of the top players should still be in the mix there. There's also the interesting thing about it's kind of like the discussion we have at offensive line, where are they a tackle? Are they a guard? We're having some of the same conversations with some of the DBs. Are they an outside corner, or are they nickel, or do you see them in kind of a hybrid role or something? So, it does maybe slim the pool just a little bit, but Maxwell Hairston, for instance, ran a 4.28 at the combine, and after an injury-plagued season, I think he needed it. Maybe that puts him in that Bills range somewhere in the late first round. Couple defensive tackles didn't work out fully at the combine. Maybe there's still a little reservation, or it's a deep enough class, people fall. That could offer some pretty good players, some options there. So those are the two spots that I would probably lean towards. I haven't gotten to the Bills pick yet in my mock, so I can't really even give you a spoiler, but I would say those are the two that if the right player's on the board, I would probably lean heavily towards.
Yeah, the Bills have 3 picks in the first. They have 30th and then 56 and 62, and we're talking.
Yeah.
Brownie and I are like, you're thinking at 30th, and I've put this on our whiteboard in our office. I don't think the Bills will pick 30th. I think they're going to move up or down. We saw them move twice last year. We've seen them move up and down. And we've rarely seen them pick at the, on the pick that they've got going into day one. But if you've got 30, 56, and 62, would you think it's unheard of to get 2 defensive linemen at 56, 62, or 30 and 56 or whatever that are quality enough to be considered value picks that high?
Yeah, it would be interesting to double up at a position. Obviously, they could also do it a corner if they wanted to, right? I'd like to see a receiver in the mix as well, if I'm being greedy, if I can cover all my wants and needs and everything like that. But yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how they play the top of the draft. Because to your point, last year, even if it ends up working out long term, there was this sort of outsider perspective. Maybe they were a little passive there, and let a pretty good player, pretty good receiver cross their face, if you will, and go to a division rival in Xavier Worthy. So, I know that point's probably been, drilled down too much a little bit, but I wonder if it doesn't at least open up the possibility for being more aggressive and seeing that opportunity. A team like the Minnesota Vikings at 24, I look at and say, I think they only have like 4 picks right now off the top of my head. I can't remember the exact number, but that's a prime candidate to move down. You could imagine them wanting to slide back and add a little bit more volume to their draft class. And even if they've been loading up in free agency. So yeah, I would say, if there are those opportunities to make a hop, skip, and a jump up the draft and the right players there, and they don't feel like they can get, 90% of that prospect to where they're picking, move up is a real possibility. And I think it's all about selective aggression when you see those opportunities, like Alexander the Great, right? Why was he a great general? He saw opportunities and he took them. And I think that's how a lot of teams approach the draft.
All right, I want to take that one step further with you, Eric, before we let you go, because the Bills, as you saw there, have no third-round picks. You just did your top 100 prospects. Talking to some people at the Combine, they believe there is a considerable drop-off once you get through the middle stages of round 4. The Bills have 2 4s, 3 5s, 2 6s. How worthwhile could you foresee it being to move back into round 3 and at least make a pick somewhere in the top 90 some odd picks because of the drop-off that they could find in front of them come day 3?
Yeah, that's a good question. And anytime you have kind of a large gap between 2 selections, whether it's your first and second pick or your third and fourth picks, and you're always going to wonder, is that going to end up being a sweet spot, or is that going to end up having some players at a position that we still need to check that box off, so to speak? I guess the answer sort of depends on what they do with 30, 56, and 62. Right. Are those part of a package, at all to move up if they end up standing pat, or do you move back from 62 somewhere in the the middle or early parts of round 3 just to kind of balance it out a little bit, so you're not going 50 some odd selections between picks? Now that's with some of these rounds that have compensatory picks, you're getting close to 50 selections anyway at the fattest rounds in these drafts, but that's more towards the end. So, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be shocked by multiple moves in this draft. Obviously, it feels like as a staff and as a scouting staff, they really do stay nimble. They have a plan, but they're willing to kind of adjust on the fly. I think we've seen that a few times, at least based on what I've been able to tell. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know that there's going to be one position that just blows you away, but I think there will be some running backs, some tight ends, and also maybe a few, straggler defensive linemen who, for whatever reason, were projected to go in the first 50, 60 picks that may end up lasting a little longer than expected.
We've seen in the last few years and started to take note of the fact that you get into the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh round, the evaluations of the same players become more and more and more wide-ranging. How do you think that's going to play out in this particular draft class?
Yeah, I think sometimes the X factors that I've been able to tell can be based on character evaluation. A player who may be a good fit for one club may not fit for another, and that could obviously reflect whether they're even on a draft board for that matter. It also could be an analysis of their injury history. You might have a player with several career injuries, and you say to yourself, "Boy, this is a real risk. We're gonna move him down to our sub board, or this player's gonna have a big red mark by their name on our draft board." And that could obviously change things quite a bit. There are also teams who put way more emphasis on the on-field work, and then there are some that put way more emphasis into the measurables, and so those sorts of things tend to kind of offer some wide variation and stuff. But yeah, every year there's a player or a handful of players that go way higher. Let's say a dozen guys that are way beyond where I expected them to be drafted, and then also another half dozen to dozen who go either undrafted or fall significantly in the draft. And like I said, if there's an X factor, I would say character and injury are probably the biggest ones that tend to come up. But you never really know. Obviously, there could just be players who are sort of viewed as square pegs and round holes. And I don't know that there's one position that's kind of loaded up with those kinds of cases. But again, the deeper positions tend to have more options, more different types of players, and maybe more questions for some of these talented guys who have a few asterisks by their name, if you will.
Eric, thanks as always for the insight. We appreciate it, and we'll keep an eye out for your mock draft next week on NFL.com.
All right. Thank you very much, fellas. Take it easy.